morning from HCL Technologies, the fastest growing large technology company in the world. And the company with 200,000 plus employees, whom we call as ideapreneurs, comprising of 165 nationalities operating in 52 countries. We have been recognized as a leader in many of our solutions and services. Just to put it in perspective, 2021, we got recognition for over 200 of our offerings set in the market across industry verticals, across different services that we put in the market, across our solutions, our products, our platforms. The recognition is not just limited to our offering. In 2021, Forbes acknowledged us as the #1 employer in the professional services sector. The business IoT Works focuses on IoT, IIoT, Industry 4.0, Metaverse, everything from products, connected products, sensors, devices, connectivity, edge, cloud, applications, platforms, advanced analytics, and everything in between. What we call is reimagining the outcome from sensor to business P&L impact, the outcome first. Now, with that introduction, just start moving. Okay, there you go. Transformation. I think we all are here. In some way or other, we are linked to this word. If I ask whether you thought about transformation today, probably the answer is yes. Whether you had a discussion on transformation yesterday, probably the answer is yes. Every business discussion, every strategy, corporate strategy, boardroom discussions, everything, everywhere we go, transformation becomes an intrinsic word to think about. And just a search on this word, you will find over 1.3 billion records. And every day, this word is searched for over 300,000 times. It's so interesting that it is such a common word, so frequently used, but still so much thinking and so much search and so much inquisitivity around this word. But in irony, transformation is not new. Humanity has been transforming from one stage to another over ages. I mean, think about the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and when you had all those rudimentary tools, weapons, and a very basic way of doing things to today's robotics, advanced machineries, drones, and all these technology capabilities that you see today. Similarly, think about just a simple example on the computing, right? In 1970, 1980s, 1 gigabyte storage was costing about $1,000. Fast forward, 2010, it was almost like 50 cents. And today, you get almost 50 gigabytes free and associated with other services, other products from different companies. So transformation is not new. We have been evolving and there has been changes in the industrial context. If you see 1940s, the first industrial computer came into being. And then 1960s, 70s, 80s saw the programmable logic controllers, NC, CNC machines, and SCADA systems, some basic plant automation. Then 1980s, the mass rise of ERPs, supply chain management, system integration capabilities, the basic robots for manufacturing automation. Then 2000, early 2000, cloud computing, social mobility, and advanced analytics. And now we are talking about in the connected, hyper-connected world, IoT, IIoT, Metaverse. So we have been changing, we have been transforming from one stage to another without probably thinking that we are not new to transformation. Then why it is so important today? If we have been doing this and we have been a part of this step change over the years, why it is important, what it actually brings? It is different today. Transformation today has a very different connotation. Think about the speed at which the transformation is happening. In 60 days, pretty much most of the companies actually moved into remote working when the pandemic hit. It took just 6 months, almost half the working population of 3 billion odd working population in the world to go to remote. So the speed of change is very, very high. I mean, think about embracing the change at that speed. If companies need to build competitive advantage in this age of digital transformation, they better adapt to the speed of change. Think about the scale. So when you talk about digital transformation spend, $2.4 trillion will be spent in 2024. And to put it in the perspective, this is probably 6th largest GDP if it were a country. 6th largest GDP in terms of the size. So the scale at which the things are happening is enormous. And sustainability is the new norm. So today, it is no more top line and bottom line. Probably you need to think about a green line. You need to think about what I do for sustainability for the future of the future operations in the business. Sustainability becomes a key driving force. So the growth has to come in a sustainable way. And everything has to be seamless. So the new digital transformation era brings an imperative that the change adoption has to be seamless. The classic example again from the pandemic, which is very fresh in our mind, think about world's population, 4 billion people getting vaccinated in less than 12 months. And it is not done by one company. It is medtech, it is pharma, it is the last mile logistics, it is the governments, it is the providers, everybody coming into place, and the data sharing as well as the process flow cutting across the company's boundaries, cutting across the supply chain, cutting across different functions. That is the new norm for value delivery in the new digital world. And when you think about your organization, our own organization, we need to think about the seamless adoption across different functional boundaries. It is not about the marketing, the supply chain, the HR, the IT, and so on and so forth, or the production and the aftermarket and so on and so forth. The digital value is created across the functional value chain, not within the four walls of a function. Now, there is one more thing which is actually creating a pressure syndrome. The transformation is not just happening at speed and at scale, which brings the momentum that poses a challenge for the organization. It is also accelerating. 18th century, the advent of steam engine created the first industrial revolution when you had a lot of energy confined in one place, and therefore gave rise to new ways of doing things. From there to the second industrial revolution, which was characterized by flow process, physical flow, transfer lines, the automotive manufacturing, and so on and so forth. It took almost 1.5 centuries from first industrial revolution to the second industrial revolution. Now 1980s of automation, robotics, ERP and digitization, which actually is characterized or synonymous to third industrial revolution, to industry 4.0, which is 2011, the term got coined, just 30 years. Just 30 years from third to fourth, 1/5 of the time. So it is not just happening at speed, it is accelerating. And the days are not far when this will be like an iterative model. Now people have started talking about industry 5.0, just 10 years. They have started talking about 5.0 and the next version and so on and so forth. The question is, do you want to be in this catch-up game? 4.0, 5.0, 6.0, benchmarking, these are the capabilities that I need to have. Is it sustainable? Because we are getting into a syndrome where this will be lot more iterative. So rather than thinking about what is next as the next step, companies need to think about how can they embrace a continual improvement cycle, continual transformation cycle, and not getting caught up on this industry 3.0, 4.0, 5.0 and so on and so forth. So as these things converge, what we call at HCL as industry next, coming to the level where you can continually embrace the innovation that is happening in the world and build your competitive edge. Now, what are the characteristics of this industry next? It is not about technology. I think we heard a lot in the previous session as well. Technology has no value. In isolation, it doesn't create value. It is in the context, it is in the process, it is in the products, it is in the context of the products and services that you deliver to the market. In that context, technology can create value. Now, the industry next is characterized by expansive ecosystem. It is not about optimizing a particular machine. It is not about optimizing a particular function. It is not about optimizing a particular production line. It is about optimizing the value delivery. And when you think about value delivery, the traditional worlds of functional value chain actually disappears. Now, classic example, as we worked with one of the leading aircraft manufacturing company, bringing 100+ supplier ecosystem and intelligently in real-time basis getting the data and sharing that data across the ecosystem partners for IT, OT, IoT and all devices management across their 7 manufacturing facilities and hundreds plus service centers and MRO centers. That is the type of expansive thinking. You need to think beyond the traditional model because the technology enablers today gives you the capability to reimagine new process. Just by digitizing the existing process, the best one can get into is a little bit more efficiency. That is not the promise of industry next. That is not where the digital transformation happens. It is not a continuous improvement scenario where you digitize and make some improvement and then come back and then think about how things are happening. You remember, when you are faced with an ecosystem challenge of speed and which is accelerating at a faster rate, you better go beyond that pace. And therefore, the incremental changes have no place. Similarly, an example of expansive working with a pharmaceutical company for virtual clinical trials. So where you bring the patients, the providers, the doctors, the nurses, the pharma companies, the CROs, the all ecosystem partners into the same platform where you can deliver a different experience to the patients or the trial spaces. At the same time, you can reduce the time to market and what we call as time to money, time to monetization up to 30 to 40%. That's the type of change, that's the type of step change that we talk about. Now, when it comes to adaptive, companies need to adapt the innovation that is happening around them. It is not about putting your own energy in innovating new things. Those era is way past. And here it is about consuming innovation. And of course, doing your own innovation in the areas of your core competency, but companies will be differentiated based on how adaptive they are in consuming innovation to deliver value. And a classic example, the adaptive and flexible model is we manage world's biggest monuments, including the tallest towers, and large bridges, large cities, and so on and so forth. And the solution doesn't focus only on, let's say, lighting or just on energy or on occupant safety, but actually all together. And that's the nature of an adaptive solution, where you can actually have the core, but that adapts for multiple different scenarios, integrating them together. Now, future-proof, and why it is so important, because that's the syndrome somebody mentioned in the morning, that over 70% of the IoT initiatives fail. And there was another study like over 86% of digital initiatives fail to deliver value. And there has to be a reason why it fails to deliver value. It fails to deliver value because one of the reasons is it is not future-proof. By the time you actually implement, you are obsolete. So therefore, how can you think about building a future-proof model that can embrace the changes that is coming in the technology world, in the business world, in the new business models, and so on and so forth to deliver value? So we worked with a machine manufacturer that actually produces world's 90% of pasta. So if you are eating pasta, you can resonate to that. Somewhere or other, HCL is linked to that. So the solution actually, what we call as farm to fork. So from your table to the, where the grain was actually the farm in different country, different geo, where, the grain was produced through the supply chain and, bringing in all the technologies, blockchain, IoT, and new business models, and helping this client for, getting all these insights for providing product as a service. So that's and that was conceptualized like, how this model will be sustainable and will stay as a competitive advantage in next 10 years horizon. And when you think about the technology dimensions, you architect in a way that will be flexible, adaptable, and can actually bring all these things together when the new age technologies you get into hypercomputing and all the new age capabilities of Metaverse and so on and so forth. So the mindset to think in this dimension is the first criteria of success in the digital age. Now, how you do it? And this is not something new. When you talk about connected workers, connected assets, you talk about connected facilities. And the biggest loophole what we have seen is that thinking all of these in isolation. And that's where it fails. So take an example of you are thinking about a worker safety solution. Now, worker safety solution in a hazardous area, probably you can have some wearables and sensing the hazardous gas or any type of, or maybe in a fall or any accident or anything that can happen. But just by getting those alerts, the value is not created. You are not going to prevent the accident. You are not going to prevent or make workers safe. You probably need to think about whether your response alert system, which potentially is controlled by HR, is in line. Can it actually adapt to these new insights and real-time insights that you get from this high-tech, technology-enabled solution that you put? You may need to integrate the facilities. Like when this incident happens, does it actually automatically shuts down the operation? Does it actually cordons off the facility? Does it actually prevent further damage happening? And those are not small things. So people initiating a digital transformation initiative in one particular function usually do not have the control what happens in the entire value chain, in the entire value delivery system, and that's where it fails. Similarly, you think about, let's say, a predictive quality, which is a very famous use case for asset management and predictive asset health and so on and so forth. So you probably can create AI ML models for predicting the asset failure for high value assets, and saying that, putting a trigger that this is probably going to come to maintenance. But do you think the value will be created just by doing this? Maybe your supply chain model and your reorder point and inventory norms doesn't allow to actually have some critical spare parts in stock, or maybe it's not agile enough to order those critical spare parts which will be needed when you are actually predicting for the failure. And even if you have done that, maybe your supplier will not be able to supply this. So even if you know something is happening, you may not be able to create the value. So when you talk about a solution, it is not in isolation. So operation and the entire value ecosystem actually comes integrated. And there only you generate the value. You create the transformational value for the organization when you think about what's the outcome I want to drive. And therefore, what solution, what process, what functional areas, what data, and how do I actually bring all those things together. Now, what are the capabilities that you need to succeed? Hyperconvergence. A mindset, a culture reorientation to embrace the hyperconvergence. In today's world, it is not OT in isolation, it is not IoT in isolation, it is not IT in isolation. It is not engineering technology in isolation. It is the convergence of all these topics. It is the convergence of IT, OT, and ET. And when you think about your problem statement, you think about what you want to drive, this convergence come into play. And combining this strength, like IT world has refined the way how the operations can be more efficient and reliable. But the OT world brings the challenge of complexity and very dedicated focus on certain value systems. If you combine these two and think about a IT-OT convergence scenario, you rethink and reimagine the business process in which they need to come together to orchestrate value. Now similarly, data intelligence. We are not talking about data engineering. We are not talking about data science. We are not talking about like data lake, We are not talking about data analytics. We are talking about data intelligence. And it's very important. And I think in one of the sessions I heard, yes, data is new oil, and people say data is the new currency. Yes, but whether that currency is usable or not, it depends on the organization's own approach to data. So you don't want your data lakes to become a data swamp. You don't need all the data in the world. To put in the perspective, 90% of the world's data that we see today is actually generated in last 3 years. And there is no model that can predict the volume of data that is going to be there in next 5 years, 10 years. Now, do you think organizations need to just put structure and process in place to manage this data? Beyond a point, if we don't have the data intelligence, not knowing what data is needed in what context and when, the data lake could become data swamp. And the extent of false alerts or the extent of the so-called insights which may not be actionable that you will be dealing with could become a process in itself. So data intelligence is extremely important. And again, if you link it to the outcome first and link it to what expected result is needed, and therefore again going back to processes, systems, data, and then doing the plumbing as to what exactly is needed, you create the value for the organization. Now micro competency, extremely important. It's very easy to identify a particular scenario and then put a solution to fix it. Very, very easy. And every industry has been doing this for ages. And this is also a problem, because you create a lot of monolithic solutions which are not scalable, which are not adaptive, which are not future-proof, which are not expansive. And there again, it comes to that paradox that we put money and energy, but we don't get the value. So we need to think about micro-competency as a service, the capability which combines different elements of different functions in the organization, and architected in a way that you can replicate, you can scale it, you can make it open to adapt different innovations in the world as they progress. And last but not the least here, compute smart. So it's not about putting everything to cloud. Organizations have a cloud strategy, and cloud is probably one of the biggest disruptors in today's world. And we have started talking about edge computing, near edge, far edge, in memory. Smart products are coming with, with ubiquitous computing power, coming with huge in memory where a lot of processing can happen. Then how do you decide? A cloud strategy, an edge strategy, in-memory strategy. I think the basic principle is what is in the context. The thumb rule is everything that needs to be decided here must be decided here. Everything that needs to be decided at the machine must be decided at the machine. And therefore, edge computing becomes very, very powerful. And you need to then get into the model where you have the hybrid situation, your cloud, edge, in-memory all coming together. And there is a prediction that in 5 years, edge computing probably will be like 50% of all the computing necessities in the world. Now, how do we shift to the industry next paradigm? So 5 principles: digital native and outcome first that we discussed. It's always the outcome that drives the value, and therefore, your back-end chain has to start from the outcome. The permeable innovation, the best examples of logistics, supply chain probably comes from the retail world. The best example of precision manufacturing probably comes from the semiconductor world, or maybe from the medtech world. So it is not about company's core competency. It is about how you create a permeable wall in the organization to embrace these innovations from outside of the 4 walls of your organization. The proof of value, I think many times you come across this: let's do a POC, let's do a proof of concept. The question we need to ask is why? What are we trying to prove? We're trying to prove the technology is working or not. It's 99.999% probability that this has already been proven by someone else. Why do you want to waste your money? You're trying to see that whether this technology actually gives you the data, whether this actually connectivity happens. The syndrome that my organization is different and therefore I need to try this is long dead. And that is one of the reasons why actually so many initiatives fall into the trap of POC, and they never scale beyond POC. So always think about the proof of value. So every time we need to experiment something, what is the value we want to get, and therefore whether my experiment can promise that value. And therefore you'll be able to bridge the gap between value promise to value delivery. Now converged value engine, we all are familiar with the value chain, which is still in use today. But fast, this digital technology actually making this collapse. So it is no more like within one functional area. For example, your car is connected. That means you don't need the events that used to be done by the car OEMs to bring the people into the, to rely on the footfall to promote your product. So now you are connected with the customer. So your entire manufacturing, your marketing function actually changes. Now experience level, the last but not the least, the most important in my view, it's all about experience. Every digital transformation you do, it's all about experience. And when iPad came to the world, the kids were not the target segment. It was not actually designed for the kids, but it instantaneously became very famous and something to go after for a 2-year-old kid, because The UX was so intuitive. It was so easy to use. The experience that it created became made it really get into a different segment of the market. So I think the industry next is now. It is not about chasing a game, and we welcome you all to experience this industry next with HCL Technologies. Thank you.